Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to analyze Emily Dickinson's poem Because I Couldn't Stop for Death. Emily Dickinson, as we know, that she was a 19th century American poet. She wrote prolifically, producing almost around 1800 poems, and her poems in themselves created a distinct identity for Dickinson. Dickinson's poetry is characterized by lacking conventional titles. Her titles are not conventional, not crystallized or condensed. Rather, they are like parts of the conversation or parts of the simplistic expression of human thought or feeling. Secondly, her lines are shorter and her poems are characterized by lot many dashes, which suggest a sense of continuity that is not found generally in poetic expression. And there are also slant rhythm and unconventional capitalization, punctuation, etc. This sense of continuity provided through the use of profuse dashes and without punctuation marks at the end of the line, the short lines, suggest a departure from the conventional poetic expression, and her poetry is more appreciated and appropriated in 20th century through the feminist movement, as the feminist critics and scholars are unified in their opinion that Dickinson's poetry represents the essential feminist ideas and feminist characteristics. So, not only the structure of her poem, but it is also the theme or the thematic treatment in speciality that make the poems feminist, because she picks up very unconventional and themes of or ideas and imageries of not so great importance, which are available in the mundane life, but she transcends those ordinary unconventional ideas to the most significant experiences of humanity. Her poetry also represent the basic sensibilities of nature, of aestheticism, of spirituality, immortality, death, and friendship, etc. Her poetry brings forth the quintessential aspect of human life amidst the vast expanses of nature, and she was highly influenced by Wordsworth, Emerson, Shakespeare, Emily Bronte, to name a few. So we find Dickinson's poetry, which was only published after her death and got its popularity, remains very referential and important throughout 20th century and also in the beginning of 21st century. So today we are going to discuss one of her most signature poems, Because I Couldn't Stop for Death. It is highly anthologized, and this poem is also, like other poems, written in the quatrains, that is the balladic stanza of 4 lines of A, B, C, B, whereas the A and C, or the first and the third line, they are written in tetrameter, and the B and B, that is the second and fourth line, they are written in trimeter. And this poem is also having all the characteristics of her poetry that already we have discussed. So now coming back to the poem, Because I Couldn't Stop for Death, we find that the tone is quite calm and measured. And in this poem, there is a very light sing-song tone, as we find used in the nursery rhymes, but that provides a levity to otherwise grave subjects, the grave subject of death and immortality. Here, death is personified in a malleable subject, a gentleman beau or lover riding in a horse-drawn carriage, and the poet is the speaker, is the narrator, and she is providing an anticipation of heavenly Christian death, the encounter with death. But this encounter is not making death the conventional tyrant, the terrible and horrible agent. Rather, it is transforming death into a gentle, courteous, loving agent. So, the poem is creating a new sense of the rapport between humanity and death. It is unlike John Donne's metaphysical poem, Death Be Not Proud, where Donne has decimated death into nothingness, into powerlessness. Dickinson is neither be in awe of death, nor she is decimating death to nothingness. Rather, she is striking a rare familiarity, a rare friendship with death. So, if we look at the poem, we will find that the very first line is arresting and striking to the reader. Because I couldn't stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. So, death is personified into a gentleman, into a lover who is stopping out of courtesy on the way for the poet, as if the poet is viewed as a beloved. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. So, death is being given a new identity of a gentle spirit, of a spirit of mannerism, who is well mannered to kindly stop because the poet as a man, as a part of the humanity, is striving and engaged in her living experiences in spite of the awareness of death. Man knows there is death, there is the end of this life, but still man never stops till the end of his life in his striving, in his desire, in his activities. Because man knows that his life is bound by time and space, and he wants to fill this boundary with as much achievements, as much pleasure, as much happiness he could gather. So the poet doesn't stop. In spite of our knowledge that Emily Dickinson led a self-exiled life, her life was gradually confined into her room towards the end of her life, but still she was striving to fill her time and her life with her poetry, her beautiful thoughts about nature, her beautiful thoughts about the people she knew, the memories of those people, the near and dear ones who departed before her eyes. So death to her kindly stopped, because death has its own duty of attending the people at the end of their life. Though Emily, in spite of her knowledge of death, didn't stop, but he was very kind to stop for her. And both were there in the carriage, just ourselves. It is a private space, as if they are both lovers. They are going to sit together and make a journey of their life. So, held just ourselves and immortality. And there is a third person, that is immortality. Immortality is presented here as a chaperone, as a conductor of these two people, Death and Emily. So here, in the very first stanza, immediately the reader is introduced into a very new world of mortality and immortality, and the interaction between mortality and immortality through death. In the second stanza, we find, we slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. It is a continuation of the tone and the spirit of the first stanza, where the poet is telling that we slowly drove, because death was not in a hurry. It is eternal. It is moving with its own speed. We human beings are in a hurry because we are aware of our confinement of time and space, our mortality. We know we are living only for a limited period. Therefore, we are in a hurry to fill this limited period with as much as we can. But death is not in a hurry. Therefore, we drove slowly drove. But it also gives credence to that romance between Death and Emily, as if they are the lovers, and for them time has stood still, it is not moving, they are unaffected by the striving of common life. So they are driving slowly. He knew no haste. Death was not in a hurry. He was like a very well-mannered gentleman who doesn't want to offend a lady and who doesn't want to take away the pleasure and leisure of the poet. And I put away. So the poet is also reciprocating. Emily is reciprocating by telling, I also put away, I also discarded, eschewed my labor and my leisure too. I have put away my striving, my efforts of life in his presence. His presence is so calming, so serene that I discarded my anxieties, I discarded my hurriedness and also my leisure. That the human leisure is also full of anxiety and boundaries. But here, as they are traveling through the eternity, through the immortality, where there is no such boundary of time and space, so the poet is neither in the state of anxiety and hurriedness, her labor, nor any striving for the leisure which is limited by the boundaries of time and space, for his civility. But the final line of the second stanza is emphasizing for his civility. I am also cordial, I am also civil towards him because he is so civil, he is so gentle, he is so forthcoming in his approach to make me comfortable. So it is reciprocal on the part of the poet. The poet feels comfortable in the presence of death, feeling all the pleasure. Therefore, she has given away all her pretensions, all her exertions, and she is driving along with death in a very leisurely manner. We pass the school where children strove at recess in the ring. In the third stanza, the poet is presenting three different distinct stages of human life. Now that she is going into the state of death, into immortality, so the memory of mortality, the memory of her life comes before her, it haunts her, and she distinctly remembers three stages of human life. The three distinct, broad, distinct stages of life are childhood, adulthood, or youth, and elderhood. So the childhood is coming in the image of school. It is a metaphor. The outer space is a metaphor in its continuity. The school where children strove at recess in the ring, the children are striving, the children are also striving, but they are innocent, they are happy. Their happiness comes from their innocence. They are not much aware about the death. They have only inherited the unconscious sense of death, but they are not aware of death. Therefore, they are striving in their learning, in their playing, but within the ring, within the restriction of the school. The childhood is also restricted, a stage in human life, which is confined by years, which is confined by the space. That is suggested in these two lines. So she is vividly remembering her childhood when she was in the school and how she was enjoying like these school children, both in her learning and in her playing with her friends. So they are striving at the recess, the break between the classes in the ring. We pass the fields of grazing grain, we pass the setting sun. And in the second phase, they are coming across the agricultural field of grains, where the grains are grazing and the grains are gazing, and the grains are suggesting the cycle of life and death, because the grains are temporary. They grow out of the seedlings into their maturity, and they are cut and carried away again to be put back into the field after a few months. So the youth of humanity is symbolic of regeneration, symbolic of confidence. It is confident of regenerating itself after every debacle. Youth is not afraid of death. As the childhood is ignorant of death, youth is not afraid of death. It can take all the risk, it can take all the risk in its life. It can embrace all the dangers of life because it knows that there is life after death and it has energy, it is a state of energy, it is a state of potency. So, man is not afraid. So, the gazing grains are symbolizing that state, the youth, the adulthood. And we pass the setting sun. And the third image of this memory is the setting sun. The sun is setting, it is the elderhood. It is the last part of life. But it is also graceful and beautiful like the setting sun, which is making the whole horizon beautiful with its reflected, colorful light. So, the elderhood of humanity, in spite of its awareness of death, in spite of its awareness about coming near to death, is graceful in all its striving. The childhood striving is innocence, the youthful striving is full of confidence, and the elderhood child striving is full of grace. So, the setting sun they have passed. Emily is vividly remembering the three stages of human life when she is entering into the kingdom of death with the death, the prince, the gentleman, the beau. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. But in the next stanza, she is talking about the power of sun, the immortality of sun. The sun is immortal, therefore it will go on its own way, on its own path, on its own time. So no mortal can cross it, but it will cross every mortal. As death picks up every mortal, the mortals do not pick up death. So, rather he passed us, the dews drew quivering and chill, the evening came, the dewdrops fell. That means the human body is giving up its life energy. As the dewdrops are quivering, are trembling on the blades of grass or on the leaves of the trees. So, Emily is entering into the kingdom of death. The last energies of her body are trembling out, are quivering out and chill. It is compared with the dewdrops which are very chill, cool, as if on her body the dewdrops are falling. Her body is entering into the realm of death. It is becoming cold and quivering. For only gossamer my gown. So now she is entering into the realm of death. She is going to marry the death, and death is giving her the marriage gown that is made up of gossamer, cobwebs. The dresses, the achievements, the desires, all are left behind. Man is entering into the realm of death in the naked body, and that naked body is covered by the death who is a gentleman. So here the gentleman is providing the marriage gown to Emily in the form of the gossamer. The gossamer is covering her body in the coffin. My tippet only tulle, and the tippet, that long neckcloth of fashion and beauty, which is a part of the marriage attire, is also made up of very soft materials, because it is also made by the cobwebs, by the gossamer. So the body is now covered with the gossamer, both has a gown as well as the tippet. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling up the ground. Then Death is taking his bride, newlywed bride, to his home, to the designated home, that is the tomb. So they stopped, their carriage paused, stopped before a house that seemed a swelling up the ground. It is just the swelling of the ground. It has just grew with the ground, with the soil. That is the tomb, where the body is kept in the grave inside the coffin, where the body is covered with the gossamer. And the roof was scarcely visible. But this house doesn't have a roof because there is the vast, unending sky on the top of it. So the sky is not visible. It is scarcely, the roof is not visible because there is the unending sky. But the cornice in the ground, the ceiling, it is in the ground. The curve is on the ground. But the roof is not there. The roof is the vast, unlimited space between the tomb and the sky. So, as if she has been invited into the house of death. Death has taken his beloved, his newlywed bride to his house, which is so vast, unending space. Since then, it is centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. But since that day of death, since that day of entering into the house of death, it's centuries. It feels, the last stanza is having contradictions, binaries, and she is telling it is centuries. It seems as if it is centuries, but feels shorter than a day. Why? Because human life is full of anxiety, full of desire, full of striving. Therefore, for humanity, time doesn't look unending. Time always ends for man. Because man lives in a mortal world, man lives in a conscious world of bound time and space. But in that unbound state of death, it feels like centuries. It is timeless, eternity. So the poet is feeling like centuries which should have been shorter than the day. She is making a comparison between the mortal state of being and the immortal state. And she is telling it seems as if it is centuries since she has died, since she has entered into the house of death. I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So she is telling, when we started, when death picked me up, at that moment I surmised, I guessed that the horses who were driving who were pulling the carriage, their heads are towards eternity. There is no ending of this journey. The journey is endless. It is not the journey of mortality, journey of mankind. It is a journey of death which will continue and continue and continue. So, this state of death, this state of immortality is a state of serenity, is a state of peace, is a state of leisure, but it is unending. It is not like the state of mortality where man is enjoying in spite of the struggles, in spite of the strivings. So in this poem, what we find? We find that there are ambiguities, there are contradictions in the final stanza. The poet is not making anything clear for the reader, but the reader has to surmise, the reader has to make the guess for himself or herself. The poem very subtly suggests an interdependence between life and death. The images are complexity of her thoughts and intentionally leaves everything unresolved for the reader. And her arguments throughout the poem, right from the first stanza, her arguments are not to make any conventional idea established or simply to refute the conventional idea, but to find out something new, something different, something which was not spoken, something which was not discussed. And there lies the essence of Emily Dickinson's uniqueness and her uniqueness as a feminist poet or feminine sensibility. And death is presented as something natural, strange and inescapable. It is natural, it is strange, but it is inescapable. We can't escape it. It remains mysterious and shadowing figure than fear or terror. And the phrase "we passed," it is repeated several times as an anaphora to impress the togetherness of the poet and death, as well as the poet is not holding anything but experiencing everything that comes on her way. She is also surrendering to the flow of time that is being presented here. Anyway, this poem we can analyze and we can go on analyzing it differently. There is no end to it. But we can prepare two questions out of it. One is the thematic question, the theme of death and how death is presented by Emily or conceived by Emily in this poem, which is very important a question. And the second question is about the structural question, the technical question, the literary device that she has used here, as well as the structure of the poem, how it is compatible with the thematic concerns. And for the students, I would like to suggest few books, if you can read them for enhancing your ideas about Emily Dickinson and her poetry. Critical Companion to Emily Dickinson by Sharon Later, Thematic Patterns of Emily Dickinson's Poetry by Tandon and Trivedi, and Emily Dickinson, Woman Poet, Paula Bennett. And also there are so many numbers of articles and materials available. You can engage them for your idea about Dickinson and her poetry. Thank you.